Welcome to the Save What You Love podcast. I'm your host, Mark Titus. Today I interviewed Julie Paama Pengelly. Julie is a Maori moko artist, painter, commentator, and curator, and is a veteran of the revitalization of moko Maori tattooing. Her studio in Mount Maunganui mixes contemporary and traditional designs and cultivates artists from all walks of life. With expansive teaching experience, her art practice ranges from the use of symbolic imagery to pure abstraction in graphic design, painting, mixed media, and tattooing. Over time, many misconceptions have surfaced about who has the right to wear and practice moko. Julie is one of the first women to practice in the male-dominated field. She's a strong voice for Maori women's rights and continues to break down barriers to give women a place in moko and in the arts. Please welcome Julie Paama Pengelly. What an engaging and lovely conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. We'll see you down the trail.
How do you say what you love when the world is burning down? How do you say what you love when pushes come to shove? How do you say what you love when things are upside down? How do you say what you love when times are getting tough?
Julie Paama Pengelly, welcome. Where are you coming to us from today?
Kia ora. I'm coming from Mount Maunganui, which is a small coastal province, I guess, of Tauranga, Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Definitely the farthest afield we've ever been on this show. This is such an honor to be able to speak with you and learn about this important work. I'll be honest, our audience probably hasn't heard much about the kind of work that we're going to dig into here in a minute. But before we do, I always like to just open the show up. This is very free form. This is long form. I love just sort of letting it all hang out. And it's really my favorite thing to do, just to get to know somebody. I'd love to just give you the opportunity to tell us your story. Where were you born? How did you grow up, and how did you get into this important work that you do?
Yeah, it would seem fairly random, I guess, where I am today. Certainly my family would think it was random. I was born in New Plymouth, which is a very, it's kind of defined by a mountain, a very big mountain with a very problematic history in terms of Māori relationships with the Crown. But I was born from British settler family, and my father was working the wharf there, and he was Māori. So tragically, he died in a car accident when I was 3. And from there on, I was kind of the only brown face in my family. And interesting in the whole sense of Māori families is my dad was the eldest of 17 born. Not all survived, but in that sense, he was kind of an important person in the family. But in the other sense, the colonial struggle, which made it shameful to be Māori, meant that he also was the one in the family that shunned everything Māori and changed his name, became kind of invisible in the Māori world, and took on a persona as an accountant. And yeah, so even though his family considered him important in that line, he kind of shunned that. So that became really important to me as I was growing up, because in a British family, they were farming stock, very much polar opposites, I guess. Believed in the colonial machinery because they were timber merchants historically, so that profited off, I guess, land confiscation and colonization, settlement. That side of my family had profited from it. And so growing up, I was the only brown girl, and, no one can really replace that feeling. No one can really understand, because you're always treated like, are you adopted? How do you belong? You're Māori, you're brown. So there's, you're kind of persecuted even though you're from a white family. Yeah, so that was my upbringing. And so it was, I kind of remember my father passing and thought it was my birthday because I thought it was all about me as an only child. But that happened all, very quietly in my family as well. So it was like suddenly I was separated from my whole Māori family. And because my dad, my dad was the eldest, my Māori family had wanted to adopt me. And my mother kind of made me invisible to them so they couldn't find me. So that's not an unusual story. Just saying that Māori grew up, of my dad's generation grew up often at religious schools, told to shun their culture, become Christianized, become English speakers, become believers in God. And not speak their language. So that was pretty common. So my generation were the ones that have looked back, have realized we've been persecuted because we're brown, and have wanted to, probe that part of our heritage. And it wasn't until, and I had a really difficult schooling. I kind of resisted everything. And I think as a solitary child, I didn't have brothers and sisters. That was kind of my presence was resistance, pretty much. And it wasn't until I left school and I went to university and I had a number of events happen, but the most important one for me was ironically the coup in Fiji. There was a military takeover in Fiji, and it was really cheap to go there. It was like $300 return for a holiday.
Yeah.
So some of us students decided we'd go over there and have a tropical holiday. And while I was over there, I kind of I had this epiphany. I saw the whole, colonial paradigm right in front of me, everything that the colonial machine brought in contrast to all the beautiful tradition. And, it often takes that move overseas to actually see what's happening under your own nose. And up until that time, I wanted to be working in the third world. And then when I went to Fiji and I was like, oh my God, we have an opportunity to change what we're doing in New Zealand. And in this, and in the meantime, I'd found my family and a lot of other things that happened personally. But that was my moment where I thought, my skill is in arts. And I know how important it is. It's our visual language. And we're losing it. We're losing our oral language, but our visual language tells us how to treat this world. And it shows us what our world should look like with everything that we believe in around us. And so, after that epiphany, I had a second one when I was teaching, and I was sent to a teacher training course not long after that. And I didn't have any teacher qualifications at that time. And I had contact with a very important artist teacher, Robert Yonke, and at the same time, a very important body marking artist, Māori body marking artist, Derek Lardelli. And both of those things said to me, this is where I need to be. And I believe in it with a passion that, the arts in general, the Māori arts, tell us how we should be in this world. They always did. They told us how to interact with our everything else around us. Everything has a spirit. We call it a Māori. We respect everything like it is our blood. And toi Māori, everything that we create pays reverence to those things, carries that important story and communicates with us our personal important stories, intergenerational stories. So those were the things that impacted me. Otherwise, I could have been pretending to be this white girl for the rest of my life.
Wow.
Would have been really interesting.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing such an impactful and vulnerable story. And I'm so enthralled by this epiphany moment. And I'm wondering, when you went to Fiji, was it was it strictly the cultural things that you noticed about the stark contrast with colonialism and the people there, or was there something as well about the place, literally the land and the water? And was there something about place that had some value to you as well as your observations around the cultural side of things?
Yeah, that's a really interesting uh, question, actually, because it's all about place. Um, you know, I think the first impression of the Pacific Islands, if you're someone that's outwardly aware of who we are as people, it's recognizing kin and it's recognizing where we've come from. So, when we're sitting in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where we're a minority percentage, and we head over to Pacific Islands, and I've been to a lot now. For me, and that's another jump, but for me, our relationship to Moana Nui a Kiwa is critical to how I see the world as well. We didn't just stop here 200 years ago. We were going backwards and forwards. We were one big, I wouldn't say bubble, ocean, I guess, of understanding of each other, of kinship, of our land and our waters and our waterways and our travel. So because, in Aotearoa, we've become land people, and it wasn't until 1990 that we shifted our focus quite strongly to our waka traditions and reinvigorating our relationship with the rest of the Pacific Islands through our seafaring, and a lot of work has been done in that field. But I've had an understanding of that from the moment I set foot in Fiji. So what I saw there was the direct relationship with the land, with the water, the things that we'd lost. It was fast tracked back years before, one before we left, but also before we had the colonial influence. This was our lifestyle, living at one with the whenua, the land, at one with the water, at one with what we felt the atua, the forces presented to us, and we lived in symbiosis, if you like, with that. And so did our arts. So there was that recognition that that is our relationship, that is our meaning. That is what because I guess you can appreciate that the more you colonize, the more your stories become generic and they become fed back to you like, this is the god of, and woman did this, and men did this, and woman never tattooed. And those are the stories we're fed, and they're fed through the eyes of missionaries with their own, bias and their own story and their own agenda. And we've lost the continuous line of oratory of being told those stories, and we've lost a visual line, the mnemonics, if you like, of giving us an inroad into those stories. There's been amazing objects that have been uncovered, but still we've lost our storytelling and the visual record of that. So going to all of those islands puts that back in place. And I have to say that probably the biggest, for me, I've had an understanding for quite a long time that when we talk about Hawaii in our tradition, we're actually talking about a place in Tahiti, but we're also talking about even further back. So we carried in the way we talk about our history, we carry names everywhere we go. So Tahiti is like, for us, the whenua of Tahiti is the center. It's like the parliament at one point in history. And all the islands that came off it, Aotearoa, Cook Islands, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, all around that, Hawaii, they we allude to them as the tentacles of the octopus, and Tahiti's the center. But that actually translates even further to the channels that we navigated, right? How we found our lands again. And there's whakapapa names, there's genealogical names in all those islands that relate to all of us. So, you know, while we're sitting in nationhoods and colonial definitions of who we are, we're actually one bigger family, and we are one big land and ocean. You know, that's how we see our world, our cosmos. And so when you talk about, you know, spiritually, we are those lands and those oceans, and we feel that when we go there. There's a couple of places in Tahiti actually, which our voyagers the captains went back and forward, and they still do. Crucial people who know, they still go there and maintain those relationships. And you can feel, when you go there, you can feel the spirit of all the people that have been there before. It's a really powerful thing. And if you've never felt that in the chaos of living this world, then you've really missed something, I think. And so now a lot of Māori are actually, as tribes, as different types of groupings, they're taking the pilgrimage back to the lands, to the families, to the language. The language is the same. You know, they're reaffirming those connections because they make us feel alive and more powerful than we do in a world that isn't defined by us, you know?
Wow. You just lit 50 different lights on my switchboard here, and I'm not sure which one to attend to first. First off, I'm sure you're aware, at least peripherally, of an indigenous resurgence here in North America, Turtle Island, as it's known to many tribes here. Very similar stories that are going on. I just had a wonderful encounter just a week ago with a Nimipu Nez Perce leader who we were talking about this idea of a family being steeped in a colonial way and fear negating the historical context because people didn't want to disclose their language or their traditions and get in trouble or worse, be killed or have some kind of
Persecuted, yeah.
persecuted adverse effects. And so much trauma has come out of that, and it's it's astonishing to me to see that this is a continual story with the people who have had oral traditions for time immemorial. And it's not a surprise to me, that we're talking across an entire ocean around a story that has this level of continuity to it. And it's so inspiring and beautiful. And I can feel that passion in you, in your own rediscovery, in your very marrow, your DNA. It's very apparent as you're speaking. And thank you for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome. I mean, for me, we drive an Indigenous festival, which is in its 5th year this year. And one of the reasons, I think for me, being an only child, I kind of was on a vibration where I was really aware of what other people were feeling and thinking. And as I've moved through the space of doing body marking, which is like 35 years now, as a woman in that space, being aware of what people think and feel, I never had a fear of doing what they didn't expect. That's the first thing. And the second, I mean, you have to be quite fearless to do anything that is counter mainstream, I guess, to what other people are thinking and doing, even our own people. Women don't do this. Women never did this. And I said, no, I won't accept that rhetoric. I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to find that evidence. You're being lazy. You're being lazy consumers. That's kind of one of my terms for us. being lazy. But in that discovery and in being a woman who's been marginalized in that practice, and traveling quite a lot, particularly in the Pacific, but Turtle Island as well, is understanding what other people are feeling as marginalized people and how they view Māori in New Zealand. They see us as really feisty and leading the way in all these things, because our colonial history is so recent. We're still quite strong in trying to combat various ways, politically, culturally. We've had lots of land marches. We've had success. And so with our revival of skin marking in particular, we're ahead of the game for some who are, so much more marginalized than us. And I have to say, we've suffered a great deal of loss and pain, but they've suffered exponentially and still do the intergenerational stuff.
Yeah.
So, for me, it's like, where do we find our people? Our people are the Indigenous in the Pacific. They share our genetics. But on another vibration, we share the same with First Nation, Canada, Alaska, America, South America. All these people that have been marginalized have the same value. So it's actually, they have the same way they value the world. And it's actually, it's a conspiracy, I guess, to live a certain way and to suppress another way. And the Indigenous nations are the byproduct of suppressing the other way. And, people want to digest little bits of us. Oh, let's pray to the navel, and namaste. They want to digest little bits of that Indigenous culture, the haka, whatever it is, because they feel like, it's giving them a better way. But actually, we have a better way. We always had a better way, and that was a way that looked after the world and each other.
Exactly right.
We weren't perfect, but there is other ways to live this world. And unfortunately, they don't necessarily go hand in hand.
That is true.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, though, it does feel, and maybe this is just partially a function of being in very close proximity with Indigenous artists and friends here in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. But for me, even in popular culture here in the States, there was a show over the last several years called Reservation Dogs. It was a big hit.
Great show.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful show. One of my favorites in the last 5 years, just across the board. And there really is, and seems to be, a resurgence in a real uptick in Indigenous storytelling, awareness of Indigenous art, a necessary reckoning with the injustice that has been done over the last 250 years. And it's about time. And it's beautiful. And so with that as a segue, we're going to get into the main show here, which is your beautiful art and furthering this art form, empowering and taking it in directions maybe it hasn't gone before, or reconnecting better with the direction that was definitely tied to the past. Just to start at the tip of the spear here on this, can you tell us, and for our audience who just has no idea about the kind of work that you do, just to start, what exactly is Tomoka tattooing?
So tamoko is it's indigenously Māori, obviously, and it's our form of body marking, whereby the artist tells the story related to the individual. Generally, it's anything from their whole whakapapa, their whole genealogy, their whole life, to aspects of it. The language is held by tradition. So it is a language that's passed down. It comes from different facets of our world as well. I guess, just a little bit of insight into the language and why those Polynesian traditions are so important, because that body marking was prolific right through Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia, all of those islands. But for Māori, our main carrier of our knowledge from the islands to New Zealand, and when we actually settled, came from aspects of the canoe. So the bottom of the canoe carried a very powerful design, which we call the puhoro, which actually talks about safe passage. It's about life journey. It signifies, just as our language does on a metaphorical level, so many things. But it's actually a really powerful design, and that features in tāmoko, often on the legs. So we have a number of areas that actually are quite significant, one of them being the marking that I have on the chin. And when I say significant, like, I haven't done anything in particular to earn this marking. It's a birthright. It's something that often happened at puberty. That's pre-colonial. That was the way we lived our life. It was something that protected the woman. It has a connection, spirit connection, personified there. And it also made them attractive, obviously at puberty, for gaining partner. And then there's the mataora on the man, which took many forms, which had also a life journey and obviously a thing of beauty. A lot of people have made a big deal about it being fierce. I think, we saw it as really beautiful. Yes, if you saw someone coming angry at you with a club and their face, and you weren't one of knowing, you might think it's fearsome, but in actual fact, I'd probably be pretty impressed. And we also had a significant one that was on the buttocks, thighs, and back. And that one is pretty much carries your whole heritage. Wow. A significant one that you wore in the heritage. And once again, misconceived as a kind of warrior type piece, but in actual fact, it represents everything about your genealogy. And the fact that you have a warrior coming at you with your legs painted like this also means that, you might perceive it as fearful if you're on the wrong side of it. But for the main part, for me, there's a number of things that are really important about moko. Our relationship with the environment, the things that we gained, obviously when we were creating moko, there's a very organic relationship with the things that we're using. In tradition, we use the albatross. Everything was made from the environment. And that was our world at that time, right? That was how we paid reverence to the wood that we took, the albatross that was made the teeth of the uhi that we called it. So those things connected us very much to the world, but the language connected us to all our ancestors, of which the guardians of every part of our world, people like to call them spirits. They're connected. We're connected through there. For me personally, I believe that as we traverse, and this is my way of flipping the world, that we are, the world is inside us, and as we make sense of our connection to it and we reach high levels, I guess, that comes out in our body. We manifest that on our body. But it is that we're connected through, people like to call it the God, but actually we're connected to the universe. That's our God. It's not one singular thing, it's cellular everything. So that's how I believe. The other part of it is, particularly in the contemporary sense, is, back then we could identify tribes, we could identify everything through their markings. Now it's an overtly political statement as well about, we're not going to go away. You can shame us. You can evict us from marking our body. by passing laws and making it illegal for people to do it, which happened in 1907. But the revival, which is nearly 40 years old, when we started that revival, there was no, I guess we didn't really have any expectations of domination, if you like. We were just fighting for our lives, We're fighting for our well-being. And the fact that even a small mark is the healing of bringing that world back to us is a powerful thing. That intergenerational pain, the loss, the disconnection, the not allowed to be or wear or do what you used to do. So it's a very personal sovereign act as well, as it has become quite powerfully a collective sovereign act.
Beautiful.
And one in which has given our community so much that, you'd have to be in the know to appreciate it. And one of the beautiful things about that is, being in that space early on and having to convince our people out of their pain that it was okay to do this again. It was okay to bring this back from where some of us had buried it. That was actually quite a lot of work. And still today we confront some of those misconceptions about where it belongs. We should never have brought it back. But actually seeing ourselves 40 years on and where we've come, I think that's what people see with heart, that, you can make change, and that can be incremental in making bigger change to the conditions of how we are as people. It's actually seeing the power of the medicine for what it truly is. And that gives you access to, obviously, other layers of learning. Yeah.
Beautifully said, Julie. Thank you. Halftime. Did you know you could have the world's finest wild salmon shipped directly to your door? It's true. Our Ava's Wild Bristol Bay sockeye salmon is the lowest carbon footprint center plate protein on the planet, and it's packed with heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids. Don't take our word for it. Ask chefs like Seattle's Tom Douglas and Taichi Kitamura, who are serving our sashimi-grade wild salmon in their award-winning restaurants. You can have the exact same fillets we deliver to them, shipped flash frozen to your door. What's more, Ava's Wild donates 10% of our profits to Indigenous-led efforts to protect Bristol Bay in perpetuity. That's the place we source the salmon from. Right now, that looks like supporting the Bristol Bay Foundation, granting Bristol Bay's Indigenous young people scholarships to four-year colleges, universities, and trade schools. Visit avaswild.com to join our growing community doing good by eating right. That's save, spelled backwards, wild.com. And eat wild to save wild. Now, back to the show. I understand there are various ways of physically implementing this work. So tattoos are super popular now. Most people are getting them. There's kind of where you go to a tattoo parlor and there's modern equipment that will do things fairly quickly. And then there's another way or other ways. Could you elucidate a little bit about the traditional ways of deploying tamoko?
Oh, yeah, it's just so fascinating the way different Indigenous nations live out their technical ways of applying. I think a really, really long time ago, we probably did hand poke. That is kind of for various reasons, some tribes have stayed in that tradition or moved in back to it, largely because it's quiet and they can't be, found out for doing it. Traditionally, you'd call hand tap which is similar to what the Samoans, the Hawaiians, and much of Indonesia are doing now in their revival. With the uhi, as I alluded to. The thing with the hand tap is that we were renowned for carving the skin. So the faces in particular, even though some of the photographs have been doctored and have been accentuated, we actually carved the skin. And the uhi that we used for that was like a blade. So the incision was like an operation. There's some pretty scary accounts of that happening, and where the smoke from his pipe came out of his cheek because it was so deep, So people died getting moko traditionally. So that wasn't, and there's been many, many thoughts around how that incision happened because many people have tried to replicate it. My theory is that one of the important steps that we haven't focused on is that we used to put in the healing process after putting the first cut was a cut like a blade of an adze, and then the second one was inserting the ink, which you needed teeth to hold the ink, right? Because a blade's not going to hold ink. But the third step for me is the most important one, and that was that resin was put into that wound. Kauri resin from the tree, very powerful tree, was put in that wound because you were put in a state of sacredness or tapu in a hut where you healed. You were fed with a particular funnel. This is, the big operation. And this was put into your wound. And for me, that it makes sense that was the only way that cut stayed open. Because anyone that's tried to do it today, there's no way that any cut will actually stay open and keep a groove. So that's the first thing about what is actually real tradition. But we didn't do that all over our body. So we did something more like what the Samoans are doing with the teeth and it's like a hand poke, but many are poked at the same time. So we had our own tools that were very much, they were fostered along the same lines as Hawaiian, but because we did a lot of tight curves, our tools often were a lot closer together. They weren't these big clusters that the Samoans have, these big daddies of, they pump in heaps and heaps of ink. We had these intricate line work. We didn't pump in stacks of black areas. So that's kind of, and the other thing about Māori design is it had evolved to that very delicate balance between the space and what you tattooed. So it was much more of a delicate form, but from far away, you saw the impact of it. So it was kind of the less is more principle. So the important thing about, like, before the actual revival, what I say the revival, because there was a lot of work happening in pockets. There were people practicing with uhi. There were people using machines. There were people using boob machines in prisons. There were gangs reviving areas of it. But the revival space in New Zealand was a conscious decision. And what we had the privilege of is having a national body that not Creative New Zealand, Toi Māori, already had committees of different art forms that were trying to bring together, particularly after 1990, which was 150-year celebrations of signing the treaty. And so that group was getting a lot of, come on, you need to support the moko artists. The other committees, the weavers, the carvers, they were going, I think we need to do something in this space. And so they called a meeting. And at that time, I was at that first meeting, a number of artists that were already, doing a bit of work in that space came to that meeting, and we made some serious decisions around it. And one of those decisions was that we were going to work health and safety. We were going to work with modern materials that we could control the health and safety, because we didn't want anyone stopping it.
Yeah.
And the Samoans had some high profile deaths.
Oh, wow.
They'd had a series of three. Two had died, and one had got seriously ill from an infection because they were doing it at home,
Mm-hmm.
illegally. And so as a group, we worked really hard on that health and safety. We helped the government write guidelines around it so they wouldn't come down hard on practitioners. So we opened the information around that space. We went to important performance events that Māori, it's now the National Kapahaka to Matatini, had been going for a long time. We went and we profiled in public moko.
Wow.
And we went round different marae, which are the different iwi and tribe and sub-tribe groups, and we did moko. We talked about it and we demonstrated. We demonstrated in museums. We went right round and we actually built the community around it. So it was a conscious decision to do it, and it was a conscious decision to do it with needles.
Mm.
And now 40 years later, the fact that we're using modern machines, I mean, the modern machine has just gone out the gate. Tattoos are so popular, and the machinery is just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the barriers way back when I started was the expensive and autoclave, to sterilize this stuff.
Sure.
And making needles by hand in any, sense is a lot of work. So yeah, so that was a conscious decision. And now 40 years later, what we have gained in our design, and our ability to execute what I guess we want as artists, means that it's really difficult to go, I think we'll just go back to using the uhi and carving out faces,
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not just a tamoko artist. I sit I trained as a contemporary Māori artist as well. So I kind of sit within that space of, yes, it's important that we understand the value of tools and any tools, and the value of the world and what we lose and what we gain by doing things. And I've practiced with the uhi as well. But I'm also an artist at heart, and I want to get the very best. If I went and retrained with the uhi and gave it the attention it needed, it would take me another 30 years
Sure.
to get to where I am.
Sense. Makes total sense.
So
You're able to get
yeah,
that art, get that message out, and do it in a way that's not going to have adverse effects on health and shut things down. I mean, that's perfectly clear. That makes so much sense. I heard, a lot about being intentional, and I know that so much of this art is intentional, both in terms of where it is on your body. You described that beautifully earlier. Also, at various points in a person's life. Can you talk a little bit more about that intentionality? For instance, getting the work done on your face versus your buttocks versus a various timing of the getting these during the course of a person's life.
yeah. No, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the way moko happens is very similar. For us, we ask the person to give us their story, and that generally it can be very personal. And it does, generally they've come to the decision to take a marking because there's something that's compelled them to do it. And like if it's a small piece on their body, and it's to, it could be to mark a death, it could be to mark graduation, it could be to mark, I want to get there, but I'm not there yet. For me, there's no restrictions on that. It is how you personally feel and what that marking is going to commemorate, remind you of. It's a life journey. It's not a destination design,
Sure, totally.
So that's really important because, and I have to talk to them about what the designs represent, because they're putting their faith in something that they don't know what it's going to look like. I'm going to suggest to them where it could be. They might come with the idea of where it could be, and I'll say, well, maybe that's not appropriate or is appropriate, depending on, or it might be subtle things like you might want them near your heart, so maybe it's the inside of your arm, personal things. If they're bigger pieces, then, obviously we always talk about aesthetics because, I'm aware of how much trust they're putting in me. So I do need to see, even in the sense of what I've done, what they are drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
If it's more, and it's up to them how they want it to be done. Usually these days, if they come to the studio, they've made that choice. They'll bring family if they want to bring family. I have, while I have quite an open space with other artists, I also have privacy and, intimacy. So I've done faces, which I consider to be an intimate exercise in my public space, which I think, for me, that's an education exercise. That's people being exposed and seeing it and going, wow, this is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
They'll come because it's my space is at the front. They'll come in through the front door. They'll walk to the desk because they're here for an appointment with someone else, and they'll see 20 people, guitar playing, someone lying there with a beautiful feather cloak on them, and me working on their face, and they'll be like, wow, what did I just see? You know? So for me, if people are comfortable for doing that, for me, the more champions we have, the better. So it's demystifying that and not allowing people to walk away from what's important to us,
Mm-hmm.
So that's always been a really important part of what I do, is taking the other, or, the non-Māori along with that journey. So, but generally, when we talk about the face, I'll talk about what they do, what their roles are in the family, where they are in the family, what number, whether they have support in their family, and also in their life. Because while this, in times of old would have been an entitlement at birth, now people put themselves through terrible, things that they might need to achieve before they get one. I have to learn to speak my language. Well, actually, we had that. That was unquestionable. I need my older sister get it first, or my grandmother to get one first. Or I need to be on the marae more. I need to know my whole genealogy. And I'm like, no. All you need to know is that you can uphold it. And that you are going to be able to walk with your head high. So that, while it seems like a really small mark, when that's finished, there's so much. It's an overwhelming experience and a privilege to be part of it. It's like a relief. It's like being there all the time. It's like all the trauma has dropped. I can be who I am. So many things. It's incredible.
I can see that.
It's a rebirth. It's a rebirth.
Yeah.
So that, even though it seems like a small thing, it's powerful. It's powerful, even more powerful than some of the big body pieces, because those ones, people have already overcome quite a few things to get to that point. This is when they get the bigger ones, there's a lot of pain to go through. Obviously, it's quite a big commitment, and they're walking a life that they're never going to turn back on.
Right.
That's a pretty big one. And even though it's not always seen, it's a reminder that and actually I read something really interesting that made me think about it the other day, a Filipino bit of wisdom, saying that, in the Philippines, they believe that you walk with this to the other world and you're still paying reverence to the spirits by what you're wearing on your skin. And I was like, I really love that, because that's what we're doing. We're saying we see you, we hear you here, we're bringing you here to, help us through this world. We believe in you, and to take that through to the afterlife, that was just a reaffirmation for me that that's what we're doing.
Beautiful.
Mm.
Beautiful. Are there traditional rituals, moments in time, that folks are showing up to, Maori folks that are showing up to get their particular markings at this point? Obviously you mentioned puberty on
Yeah.
girls. Are there correlating moments in time for boys or men or women in later stage in life?
Yeah, I think that today, there's so many young women getting moko kauwai on their chin.
Mm.
That is something that has just taken so rapidly in the last 5 years. And I think that's largely to do with the fact that I don't hear anyone say they're ugly. Most people would just be fascinated. So while there aren't puberty ones happening for women, they're definitely happening young. We're talking about 18 to 25, that age group.
Mm-hmm.
For boys, I feel like a lot of coming of age ones for boys, even 15, they're getting quite impatient, is they want their arms. And I think generally their arms, their forearm. And I think, again, that's a declaration because we had moko everywhere. And the forearms become popular because it shows,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a positive thing too. It's almost like armor. So their sleeve, for many, also their legs, again, it's the way they walk the world, their strength, particularly if they've lost family members, they often choose their legs. And also the chest and back has become popular. I mean, I got my chest done. It was was it maybe the second piece I got done? And that was for my father who'd passed. So, that was to hold. Some people, it's their back, it's their cloak, but for me, it was to hold him close. So in terms of ritual around it, I think ritually there's a tendency now to hold what we call moko papa. And that is when, for example, in the kingitanga, the Māori king, a number of women came forward at once to receive their chin.
Mm.
And, that will be held in the ceremonial marae at the house. There will be incantations, there'll be people talking, there'll be songs, tribal songs that have, bring the ancestors there. And they're under, in the ancestral house, all the ancestors, all the history is there in all the carvings. So, that's powerful. And when you're taking that on as a community, when there's 20 people, you're really saying something about where you feel your power as a community is. So that is happening more frequently. And to be honest, that's what would have happened in the old days, although not necessarily with such flash houses, with such, lavish ceremony, but there'd be like 20 virgins and you'd be lined up and that would be your job for the day.
Wow.
That would be you. Because the artists would travel from out of tribe. The artists would travel to that tribe. They'd be lined up as long as you could pay them in food and goods. You would be entitled to put forward those. And to be honest, some of them would, many of them would want to be put forward, and you would get done in that time. So it's pretty similar to what would have happened. The idea of coming into a studio and getting one is a much more, modern, manifestation of it.
Speaking of, I just looked at the clock. I am enraptured listening to you, and I got to get to some points here so I can make sure to
If we not got
let
any
you have
points yet.
a day here for yourself. One of the huge things I wanted to key in on here is as a woman artist, as a woman Maori artist, where traditionally have women fit into this cultural practice, and where are you taking up the flame and moving this forward right now?
Yeah, that's good question. I mean, the dominant narrative would have you believe that woman didn't do it. And that's convenient. Like I could conveniently go, oh, I'm championing it for women. That's la la la, but that's actually not true. Pre-colonial times, wahine were very powerful, and one of many of the women that did this were medicine healers as well. So understanding that it's really hard to find our history because it's written by white people who are not privileged to all the information, and didn't, necessarily hunt out these women or care what these women were doing. It's actually relies on some tribal recollection. And there's some quite powerful ones in the area next to me, about an hour away from us. Very famous woman who, when the 1907 Tohunga Suppression Act came in, she defied it, and she went around territory still practicing moko, and people hid her, for quite a number of years. And she was she's an amazing weaver, and she was considered powerful with medicine, of which Tāmoko was one of them. And she's not the only woman. There's at least 3 other women that can be named in history. So I'm not breaking new ground. But, within that revival, there was very much that dominant rhetoric that women didn't do it. And so that, but I had encouragement from men in the revival to be part of it. It was often, half-hearted, but, there was encouragement there, but there was also the dominant rhetoric. So for me, as the movement gained a little bit of traction and people would throw this to me, I was always very, very good on the academic side. So research was my thing. I'd always dive to prove. So my trajectory was always different, while everybody else, men would sit around and go, yeah, this is how it was done. Julie would dive to the books and go, no, I can actually see that this is what they did. But, so I'd be looking for every shred of evidence and be asking people that, I could get that from. So, yeah, I'd established that there was a connection to women, and also a connection to women wearing some of the forms like we call the puhoro on the thigh and buttocks, that they wore it in days of old as well. And there's visual evidence of that. So, being the first woman in that space meant that I kind of quietly carried that responsibility. But as I was buoyed along with the group and I was visibly doing it, it didn't really matter what rhetoric people said, or whether they said, oh, women should never wear that. I just carried on with conviction, and the people that were around me supported women wearing it, the other practitioners. And throughout Pacific, women wore those types of areas. So, it was obvious that those things had a whakapapa as well. Since I've been doing moko, there's at least 20 women practitioners now, and another 20 probably apprenticing. So, now I feel that my responsibility is to say it's okay, woman, now that we're all doing this, to decide what women want to see women wear. We now have the conditions to decide going forward what women want to say in a distinct way, how we want to carry the tradition, where we want to wear it, what is our distinctive language. And as women, we do have our own, or as women artists, we do have our own feminine or whatever way of manifesting that. So, that's the strength now. We're a group, and we can definitely move forward to give women dignity in that space where they can say, this is what women wear. And
Yeah.
this is the genealogy of that,
Beautiful.
through this artist and this artist and this artist. And it links me to, the days of old. Yeah.
Do you find in your clientele and or people that come to you for ritual, is there a even split between men and women? Are you having more women come to you than men? What does it look like? Breakdown, or how do you keep track of that?
Um, I probably would have had quite a lot of men in the early days and, maybe 50-50. Now, I mean, it's really hard for me to say no to people, but I try to focus on women because
Mm,
that's where I want to build the space. And the men have lots and lots of options,
mm-hmm.
but I still end up, I do get a lot of young boys, who maybe and their mothers bring them and they want them to feel safe and not be broed into this bro or this is what being a man is. They don't want that disturbed, right? They
Mm-hmm.
just want someone to understand what their boy wants. I often get the takatapui, the non-binary, and very much don't want to go to a man.
Sure.
And I get that. And I'm always available for that. And it's one of the spaces that I'm really interested in because men have thrown a few of those people under the bus
Mm,
and kind of said, no, you can't get that's for a man and that's for a woman. And so I'm interested in that language as well of stop it. I know we've had takatapui, we've had non-binary right throughout Māoridom. What does
sure.
that look like for them? We cannot try and tell them that it's one or the other. So that's another reason why women are kind of important in that space, because I think for the most part, men hold a particular persona in that space. And because we've always had to probe behind, then I'm the one that's going to probe and defend that minority space because I've been there. Yeah, so
Right.
I think probably, I would 75% get women and then 25%, yeah, other
Okay.
people that feel more comfortable coming to a woman.
Well explained. That's lovely and makes perfect sense to me. I really have two more questions and then a quick little bonus fun thing that we always do at the end of the show. Um, how does this art form comport into traditional spiritual practices? Do you and you've dive in you've told me that you dive into the books, into the history. I'm sure that there's been a lot of oral cultural history that you've gleaned along the way as well. But from an outsider's perspective, how does this art form really enhance and walk side by side with traditional spiritual custom and practice?
Importantly, pain
Mm,
very much is an agent for, or not just pain, but your body's psychosymptomatic relationship with pain
so
puts
interesting.
you in puts you in a different element. And
Yeah.
I think, you know, at the very basic physical level of I'm carrying stuff, I'm going to go and get a moko, and the pain, the tears, the body's reaction, the way you have to deal with your body. What comes to mind when you deal with it, put you on a plane of not being able to deny or not being able to control or having to, reach inside to find it. So, at any level, a person that isn't very culturally aware is going to find something in that connection. I think the way that we work as artists, and indeed the way that I work, is to bring that connectivity. And I think, at a fundamental level, that connection to each other and our world and the language that we've collaborated to do. Also, because at a very mundane level, everyone's just walking their lives, right? So at that point, without, and I haven't even talked about karakia or any, spiritual incantation, but at that point, you're asking them to connect, and we're connecting to the world and we're explaining it to each other. And then in that pain and in my thinking through, my concentration through it, you're experiencing some of it. And at the other end, you're going to walk out and there's something going on, right? At whichever level of that someone engages, whether there's music that brings that, whether there's spiritual incantation, which are, physically bring people present, that is, a form of medicine that is there. Sometimes it's there more, if the presence is bigger, because for me, it's a mediation of what else is in the room or directly in the room. So if there's 100 people, you need a lot more happening to make sure that the good stuff comes through as well, because it's not always about more is better. I think objects are really, really important bearers of that. I always ask people to bring something significant to them. Usually, and I don't even have to ask that, usually if someone is getting a marking on their face, they'll bring ancestral photos.
Wow.
So, whether it's the nan, whether it's 4 or 5 photos, they'll arrange them, and one will be on their chest usually, or close. They'll usually have a cloak or a blanket, like just recently a te vaivai, which is a Cook Island one, because someone had made that. So an object that is invested with the energy of someone else. For Māori, we believe the photograph, we only use photographs of the deceased, and that it's like evoking their spiritual presence there.
Wow.
So those are some of the things that we make sense of the modern world. And obviously person and presence. Person and presence brings that as well. But yeah, the connections that, we like to kind of say, our connection to the world, to the land and all that, that was a given. And we took it seriously. We spoke seriously, and I speak seriously myself to what I do. But I don't need to speak serious. I ask people to think carefully about what they're getting too. But maybe we don't do it in the same way all the time that we used to do it. And that's because we don't have our chiefly expert in the room. Because, it wasn't everyone, I didn't do everything back then. There wasn't one person that did everything. It took the whole community to do it. And that's an important thing to remember, that we are nothing without our community. And that's what we have to encourage, not an alien single, experience.
Absolutely. And I think you were intuiting my last question as well, about someone coming to you, and what is your criteria? How do you evaluate who will get a mark from you?
I'm a little bit more discerning. I have a few gatekeepers. Because most people will email and things like that, and I have an inbox of 10,000, so
Oh my God.
I'm not very good at cleaning it.
Yeah, you and me both.
So I've recently got someone that does that. I don't think she's very far through it yet.
Wow.
But oh my gosh, it's so difficult, because sometimes their hearts are poured out. They're poured out before you even see them, and you're just like, I have to do it. And it can be really a difficult process to get these people to a point where they want to do it. Like, it's for one woman recently, and she wasn't Māori. And just to be clear, I will definitely do non-Māori. At one point, never. But now our revival is healthy, for me, and I still call it moko. I will give someone the time if I feel that they understand it and they're going to be good carriers of it. Because for me, they're a champion. They become my champion. They haven't gone down the road and got some piece of crap from someone else. I've brought them into our culture, I
Sure.
brought them into the value of what they're getting. So one woman, it took me a full year to get, she's just so miserable with her daughter's suicide,
Oh.
but that's what she wanted.
Mm,
And for me, I couldn't get past that, and I had to do it, even if
mm.
it took me a year to get her there.
Wow.
So, um, on the other hand, there's people that walk in, and I'm like, yeah, I can see it, and
Nice.
I guess that's part of it too. I can see that, and I see you, and we're gonna do that. If
Beautiful.
that's the journey, they might ring up and cancel, and that's not their journey at this time. But yeah, so that's what I say. I'm a sucker. So I have to hide if I want to avoid it because I can be a little bit of a sucker and people know that.
Oh man. Well, you're
Um,
painting such a beautiful visual, and I've as you're speaking, I'm envisioning what it's like to be at your studio and to all of the sights and sounds, and I hope I can visit you someday. It
you'll
seems
be
like
welcome to if you get
very
there.
beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. And we always finish this show off with a fun little bonus round. I'm really curious what you're going to say. It's the same question for everybody. It's a little
I should have
imagine.
listened to someone say.
Yeah, you're getting blindsided. It's a little imagination game. But just knock on wood here, as I says, but it's kind of sort of happening all over the world now. Let's just say you had rising waters and you of course you get your loved ones and your furry friends out first, but if you could only grab one thing before the rising waters were going to take your house away, what would you grab? What one physical thing would you grab to take with you?
Am I speechless?
I have an idea
One,
about this, but I'm so curious to see what you're going to come up with.
I almost want to say nothing.
Hmm.
I almost want to say nothing because, I don't have an object that, the object that I have actually that is probably the most connected is my grandmother's bracelet,
Hmm.
which I never take off. And for me, there's nothing inanimate that is going to be worth taking. For me, if I've rescued the people, that's all that actually matters. I can't think of anything that I could not do without if I was about to lose my life.
Well,
Because I can draw, I can do everything again.
hmm I I was
Yeah.
pretty sure you were going to say that or what's on your skin. And the
Well,
bracelet though,
that would be cliche
that's
because
a
it's
little bit.
there.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
The bracelet though, if would you hold that up again? That looks like my wife has an almost identical bracelet from her grandmother that is always on her wrist.
Yeah, my
Always.
grandmother, she lived a very, very hearty life. And, I
Yeah.
didn't have anything to do with giving this to me, but always when we sat around with my grandmother, we had this big dining table, I would hear it clink. And I would go, Grandma, your bracelet. And everyone remembered because I'd watch it hover as she passed things, and
Wow.
everyone remembered me for that. And my mother, bless her soul, went, I
Mm.
want to give that to Julie. And they had to put a little link in it because my grandmother had a tiny, tiny
Oh
wrist.
wow.
But I've like netball games, anything that I've done throughout history, I've never wanted, and that's my mother's side, that's my Pākehā side.
Interesting.
I've never wanted to take that off.
Hmm.
But I don't actually have like I can't say I have a Māori of my dad or anything else.
Hmm.
So that's why I'm like, no, there's nothing I would take.
So interesting. All right. Well, last one is now it's something metaphysical, not a physical thing, but if you could only take one thing, one attribute about you, that makes you you, what would be that one thing you would take?
If I could take my attribute. Are
Mhm.
you talking about if someone brainwashed me and there's only one
That's
thing
right.
I could
If you
take?
could only take, yes, well
The
framed.
Martians are coming.
Well, well framed. I'm gonna steal that for the next hapless victim on this show. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. If you were going to be brainwashed and you could only keep one thing that's going to make Julie, Julie, what is that?
Um, I guess I'm trying to take the language,
Mm.
trying to think of the language of describing that. Because this is one word, or is it describing it?
Yeah, no, it's what you,
Um, it would be to, and it's just trying to find the right way to say it, but because there's no such thing as truth, I would say it would be always, because I think it's a true creative really, is to actually always question,
yeah.
is to always question the world and go, is this the way it should be? That I think it should be better, and to trust it. But that's two things. So
I'm gonna let
trust
you have.
your
I'm gonna let
instinct
you
to
have
question
that.
the world.
You're so delightful. I'm gonna let you have two.
Thank you.
Yes, Julie. Well, Julie Paama Pengelly, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your passion, your truth. And I know our listeners are going to be indulging in this episode, and probably this one is going to be one to savor for a long time. If you ever get to Seattle, let me know. I'd love to take good care of
Oh,
you.
absolutely.
Yes.
One of my favorite people is in Seattle. I was so close. I was so close. I was in Vancouver.
Oh my goodness. Well,
Yes,
I'm
and
going to Vancouver tomorrow. To
well,
yes.
Nahan is traveling from Seattle to Tauranga. I don't know if you know Nahan, but he's one of the traditional practitioners. And in 1 week, we will see Nahan from Seattle.
Beautiful. Well,
And look forward to having you in New Zealand. Come visit.
thank you. I will absolutely stay in touch. And for now, Julie, thank you so much. And we'll see you down the trail.
It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Ka kite.
How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love?
Thank you for listening to Save What You Love. If you like what you're hearing, you can help keep these conversations coming your way by giving us a rating on whatever platform you're listening from and leaving a comment on Apple Podcasts. It really helps get the word out. Check out photos on our Instagram feed. We're at Save What You Love Podcast, and you can get links from today's featured guest in the show notes of this episode. Join our growing community by subscribing to our newsletter at avaswild.com and then clicking on Connect in the upper corner. You'll get exclusive offers on wild salmon shipped to your door and notifications about upcoming guests and more great content on the way. That's at avaswild.com, the word save spelled backwards, wild.com. This episode was produced by Emily Fern and edited by Patrick Troll. Original music was created by Whiskey Class. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you all down the trail.